Disclosure Day is an action thriller. Today is an action chase thriller. Disclosure Day is an action thriller chase. Oh, it's just Disclosure Day is an action chase thriller. Disclosure Day is How do I get it to focus on me? Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Real Talk. Today's video is going to be a Disclosure Day review and unpacking. So it might be a bit of a long one depending on how I decide to edit it. So grab yourselves a drink and a snack and let's get into it. Disclosure Day is an action chase thriller and whistleblower drama packaged as an alien film. The story unfolds through a dual narrative that alternates between our two main protagonists, Margaret Fairchild, played by Emily Blunt, a weather reporter for Kansas City News, and Daniel Kilner, played by Josh O'Connor, who is a cybersecurity analyst. Their lives become intertwined when Daniel steals a mysterious device along with a cache of classified extraterrestrial footage from Wardex, a private military corporation headed by Noah Scanlon, played by Colin Firth. Daniel's goal is simple: to reveal this footage to the world. Wardex, however, is determined to stop him. They fear that the release of indisputable proof of extraterrestrial life could trigger mass hysteria, fracture an already fragile society, and, more importantly, hurt their bottom line. So where does Margaret come into this? Well, Margaret wakes up one day with the ability to not only speak different languages, one of those languages being the clicky sound she makes, which appears in the trailer for the film, but also that she can experience other people's entire histories and lives and fears and hopes just by looking at them. As the narrative unfolds, we find out that the commonality between Daniel and Margaret is that both woke up one day with the ability to do things that they previously were unable to do. For Margaret, this is the ability to understand and connect with humans, and for Daniel, this is the ability to understand extraterrestrials via math, data, and analytics. Let's start with the characterization of this film as an alien film, because I don't actually think this movie is an alien film. I don't think it meets enough of the criteria to be classed as an alien film. Typically, an alien film centers around an encounter, a direct encounter between humans and aliens, and the aliens themselves are central to the film's narrative and help to shape its plot. Whereas the aliens in Disclosure Day only make a brief appearance at the end, and for the majority of the movie they exist as speculation, rumours, conspiracy, and CCTV footage, which is kind of how they exist in the real world anyway. The purpose of the film is to show how humans would react to receiving some kind of world-shattering proof that everything they've been led to believe since childhood is a lie, and the aliens have been chosen by the writers to represent this truth. But in reality, that truth could have been anything. The truth is that the writers could have chosen from a range of conspiracy theories to represent this mind-bending truth that could alter society forever. Sub this in for the aliens, and the basic plotline of the movie still could have worked. The mind-bending truth could have been that the moon landing was faked, or evidence of mermaids existing, or that the Earth is flat. And again, the basic plotline still would have worked. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Daniel finds footage of mermaids, and Wardex is after him to try and cover up this proof so that society doesn't crumble. Daniel has evidence to suggest that the moon landing was faked, and Wardex are trying to cover this up so that society doesn't crumble. Daniel finds evidence to suggest that aliens exist, and Wardex are trying to cover this up so that society doesn't crumble. And this isn't a criticism of the film at all. It's just to show that the aliens are not central to the message or purpose of the film, but rather they're a plot device. Another characterization of a traditional alien film is that the stories usually fall into one of two camps. Either the encounter is friendly and benevolent, and the human protagonist is able to learn something about humanity through their encounter with the other, like in Arrival or E.T., or the encounter is hostile and violent, and the extraterrestrial is bent on the destruction and domination of planet Earth. Disclosure Day falls into neither category. The aliens in this film aren't hostile, but nor are they presented as super benevolent beings who arrive on planet Earth to impart some kind of wisdom or super advanced technology that could save humanity from the brink of destruction. Instead, the film's central insights come from humanity itself. We learn more about humanity through the human characters' reaction to the aliens, both the good and the bad. The best of humanity is represented through Daniel, Margaret, Jane, and Sister Maura, who are driven by a genuine sense of curiosity as well as a desire to share the truth. And the worst is represented by Wardex, whose leadership is determined to monopolise that truth for economic gain. The conflict at the heart of the film, therefore, is not alien versus humanity, but rather humanity versus itself. Disclosure Day, therefore, is less an alien film and more a whistleblower thriller that uses extraterrestrial life to examine human nature.
So humiliating. This is really embarrassing. Are you not ashamed of yourself?
The film has often been described as a story about empathy, and on a surface level that interpretation makes sense. Empathy, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, certainly plays a major role in the film. However, I don't think that empathy is the film's defining feature, nor am I entirely convinced by the way some viewers have romanticised Margaret's abilities as an idealised form of human connection. Margaret's gifts allow her to see and experience a person's entire life simply by looking at them. At first glance, this appears to be the ultimate expression of empathy. She doesn't just imagine what someone has been through, she quite literally experiences their memories, emotions, and history. Yet the film quickly complicates the idea that this is a gift worth envying. The more people she meets, the more she is forced to live their experiences with them, both the good and the bad, to the point where it quickly snowballs and she is so overwhelmed by how many experiences she is forced to take on in such a short period of time that it manifests into a panic attack and an overwhelming desire to distance herself from others, to the point where she at first refuses Daniel's help during the panic attack scene and turns away from him because she can't bear to take on his experiences on top of what she's going through at the time. The same applies when she meets Hugo for the first time and averts her gaze. When Hugo asks her why she's avoiding meeting his gaze, she says something along the lines of, "You seem like a man who knows a lot of things, and I'm not ready for that." Though Margaret's powers may at first seem enviable, she very quickly becomes crippled by her ability to relate to other people, and they quickly become undesirable. I think one of the lines which sums up the switch from empathy as a virtue to empathy as a burden is during the panic attack scene in the carriage, where she completely breaks down and cries something along the lines of, "I can't see my own mind." By the end of the film, Margaret learns how to manage this burden. She no longer sees her abilities as something to escape from, but as something she can live alongside. It is only after reaching this point of acceptance that she is able to translate the alien's final message to humanity. There's another reason why I'm hesitant to describe Disclosure Day as a straightforward celebration of empathy, and this is because Daniel and Margaret are not helping the aliens purely because they sympathize with them or because they feel a moral obligation to the truth. We need to remember that their connection to the extraterrestrials is, at least in part, engineered. They are bioengineered to feel an affinity to the aliens. We need to remember that they're passengers, receptacles primed since childhood to eventually come of age and mature as vessels through which the aliens can communicate with humans. I'm sure Margaret and Daniel would feel genuine empathy for the aliens anyway because they're written as good people. But the film makes it clear that their relationship with the aliens is not the product of pure compassion. Rather, it's intertwined with destiny, design, and manipulation. The aliens need a human face to their cause. They tried without it, and the result was Roswell 1947. The result was cover-ups by the military, experimentation, exploitation, and ultimately silencing. As a result, the aliens have learnt their lesson and work through disguise. We need to talk about disguise and the way in which it functions as an act of empathy rather than deception. The aliens choose to reveal themselves to a few intermediaries, namely Daniel and Margaret, imbue them with special powers so that they can understand each other and work through them to get across their message. The aliens use Margaret and Daniel's physical form so that the revelation isn't so scary. Instead, it's comforting since it bears the familiar face of a weather reporter, a face you see every day when you turn on the news. The aliens' decision to do this, therefore, is an expression of empathy, as the aliens understand that humanity is more likely to accept a difficult truth when it arrives in a familiar form. As a result, disguise is used to comfort rather than mislead. Humans aren't the only physical form that the aliens possess. The aliens come to Daniel and Margaret in the form of animals at 2 points in their lives. Firstly, as children, they encountered the aliens as deer. This encounter is a way for the aliens to reveal themselves to the two and imbue them with their gifts. The second time, the aliens are disguised as poorly CGI'd cardinal birds. The birds reveal themselves to the pair at different stages of their lives. For Daniel, this was his early 20s as a burnt-out college student, and for Margaret, this is at the present moment where she is at a crossroads in both her professional career and relationship. When both see the bird, it greenlights what was planted in them as children, and they are finally able to use their powers. So why animals? Why is this their choice of disguise? Well, if we think about it, animals are the closest things we have to aliens on our planet. They're a different species to us completely, yet despite our differences, we have been able to cohabitate, and as a result, they perhaps symbolize hope for the aliens. Hope that both aliens and humans can coexist in the same universe, maybe even the same planet. But of course, this is a naive reading, because if our treatment of animals is anything to go by, then the aliens have good reason to be cautious. Human history is filled with examples of us domesticating, exploiting, controlling, or profiting from anything that we deem inferior or other. Wardex treats the aliens in the same way that industrial farming or fishing treats animals, something to be exploited to benefit the bottom line. Yet the film also acknowledges the opposite side of human nature, our capacity to care for, protect, and coexist with other forms of life. On the topic of disguise, it's important to also acknowledge the rich cultural and narrative trends of employing disguise for storytelling purposes, which can trace its roots to biblical and Greco-Roman mythology. In the same way that Homer's lost hero Odysseus employs disguise upon his return to Ithaca to test the waters without being caught and killed by the suitors in the palace, the aliens too use disguise for the safety of their mission. Like Odysseus, the aliens realize that direct revelation can be dangerous. The Christian tradition offers perhaps the most obvious example of disguise in Incarnation. This centers on the idea of God taking on human flesh so that the divine truth can be communicated through a form that humanity can understand. Overall, the theme of disguise gives the movie a depth which alludes to the long-standing tradition of disguise as a means of empathy and security, which finds its roots in old Abrahamic and classical texts. It frames the movie as something more than a conventional sci-fi thriller. Rather, it frames it as a modern myth concerned with revelation, faith, and humanity's place in the universe. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, though I can't imagine Spielberg doing anything unintentionally, there are a lot of Judeo-Christian references in the film which are ripe for the picking. These references include miracles, revelations, the selection of a select few to spread the word, Daniel and Margaret, who are portrayed as prophets or disciples, spiritual endowments and gifts which enable Margaret and Daniel to understand these higher beings. Margaret's gifts, her ability to communicate with the aliens in their language, literally mirrors speaking in tongues. In addition to this, the movie opens up some interesting debates and conversations regarding theology and epistemology, most of which take place in the dialogue between Jane, Daniel's girlfriend, an ex-novitiate, and Sister Maura, a nun who lives in the monastery Daniel and Jane find refuge in while on the run from Mordex. In the monastery, Jane reveals that she abandoned her calling because somewhere along the line she lost her faith in God. Unlike Daniel, who is eager to reveal the truth to humanity, Jane doesn't think that people are ready to hear the truth. She instead believes that the truth would rip apart the already fragile seams of society, a society that is on the brink of war, which we see brief glimmers of in the film. After Jane sees the footage of aliens, her reality is shattered, and she calls Sister Maura to discuss her concerns. The exchange reveals a fundamental difference in how the two women understand faith. Jane assumes that the existence of extraterrestrial life would challenge or even replace belief in God. In her mind, the appearance of a superior intelligence would create a new object of worship, one capable of displacing traditional religion. She argues that seeing something seemingly divine in the flesh would fundamentally destabilize society, because so much of human identity is built upon religious belief. But the film appears to side more closely with Sister Maura's perspective. The existence of aliens does not necessarily invalidate the existence of God. Even if the aliens are technologically, intellectually, or socially superior to humanity, that does not make them superior to God. It does not make them divine. Jane treats the aliens as potential replacements for God, whereas Sister Maura views them as part of creation itself. From this perspective, the discovery of extraterrestrial life would not undermine faith, but expand it. Believers would simply incorporate the aliens into their understanding of the universe as another aspect of God's creation, rather than as a rival deity. This is why Sister Maura's most important observation is that Jane's problem is not that she has stopped believing in God, but rather that she has stopped believing in people. Jane no longer trusts humanity to respond to revelation rationally. She assumes people will abandon centuries of religious tradition in favor of whatever new source of meaning presents itself. To some extent, however, Jane's fears are justified. We actually see an example of her concern brought to fruition closer to the ending of the film, in a scene where a woman clasps Margaret's hand to hear her gift, Margaret is disgusted by this, stating, "I will not be anyone's religion." It's a brief moment, but it validates much of Jane's concern. The scene suggests that many people are less interested in understanding the truth than they are in finding something to believe in. In a society that often feels spiritually exhausted, fragmented, and uncertain, people may cling to whatever offers comfort or certainty, regardless of whether they truly understand it. This tension lies at the heart of the film's epistemology. Disclosure Day repeatedly asks whether human beings genuinely want the truth or whether they simply want narratives that make them feel secure. The revelation of extraterrestrial life forces every character to confront that question. Ultimately, however, the film comes down firmly on the side of knowledge, because the movie is a celebration of knowledge, an inversion of the story of Genesis. If Daniel and Margaret represent a modern Adam and Eve, the chosen pair selected to guide the rest of humankind to process the truth, then their having eaten from the tree of knowledge is not necessarily a bad thing. Instead of being cast out of Eden, Margaret and Daniel's curiosity and quest for knowledge is celebrated rather than punished. No more is this summed up than in the translation of that clicky sound, which Daniel tells Margaret means, "Don't be afraid of what you don't know." This line encourages curiosity rather than shying away from it. Let's talk about the ending. Daniel and Margaret finally make it back to Kansas City News and finally reveal the truth to the world on live TV. Hugo wheels out an alien, and this is such an important scene as it's proof of their revelation. It's the first time either Margaret and Daniel are seeing evidence of all they have worked for. The alien whispers something into Margaret's ear, and she stands in front of the camera and translates. We only hear one word before the credits roll: listen. Though I'm sure many found this ending to be frustrating because it's one of those endings that leave it up to the interpretation of the audience, I loved it and thought it worked on so many levels. Firstly, from a religious point of view, it alludes to the Jewish declaration prayer, or the Shema prayer, which encapsulates the core monotheistic tenets of Judaism. If you're unfamiliar with the prayer, like I was, I'll read out the first couple lines to you. Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Blessed be the name of the glory of his kingdom, forever and ever. You shall love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might. Growing up Jewish, I don't think it's any stretch to assume that Spielberg was familiar with this prayer. I think it's interesting to end the film with the start of a prayer. It gives the ending a strange sense of optimism. The revelation of extraterrestrial life should, in theory, be one of the most destabilizing events in human history. It represents the collapse of humanity's long-held belief that we are alone in the universe. Entire political systems, religious traditions, and cultural assumptions would have to adapt to this new reality. Yet the film ends not with panic, chaos, or destruction, but with an invitation to listen. There's something unexpectedly hopeful about that. The word suggests that revelation is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new one. Humanity has finally learnt the truth, and now it must decide what to do with it. Rather than presenting disclosure as an apocalypse, the film reframes it as a moment of renewal, a chance to rethink our place in the universe and begin again with a broader understanding of existence. Either way, the ending is what you make of it, and those are the types of endings that I typically enjoy.